McDonald's doesn't make money from burgers. Right now, somewhere near you, there's a McDonald's. You probably think of it as a burger chain. It isn't. At its core, McDonald's is one of the largest landlords on planet Earth, and the burgers are almost a side effect. Here's the sentence that explains it, straight from the man who built the system. We are not technically in the food business. We are in the real estate business. He wasn't joking. And once you understand what he meant, you'll never look at a Golden Arches sign the same way again. In the 1950s, Ray Kroc wasn't rich. He was a milkshake machine salesman who talked his way into franchising a small burger stand. The idea worked. Locations opened fast. But Kroc had a problem hiding under the success. He was only collecting about 1.4% of each franchise's sales. Barely enough to keep the lights on at headquarters, let alone fund more expansion. He was growing a company that was, on paper, almost broke. To make matters worse, franchisees didn't need much money to get in. In some cases, a deposit as low as $950 was enough to open a location. Growth was fast. Cash flow was thin. Kroc had built a company that looked successful from the outside and felt fragile from the inside. So how does a company with almost no margin become one of the most valuable brands on the planet? The answer wasn't a better burger. Enter Harry Sonneborn, a finance executive with a background in ice cream franchising, not fast food. Before McDonald's, Sonneborn had spent years inside Tasty Freeze, watching franchising up close from the finance side, seeing exactly where these deals made money for headquarters and exactly where they quietly bled it dry. Sonneborn looked at Kroc's numbers and saw the real flaw immediately. Kroc was trying to get rich selling hamburgers. He should have been trying to get rich owning dirt. Sonneborn's pitch was simple, and it's the same pitch that would go on to build one of the most profitable structures in business history. In 1956, Kroc and Sonneborn created a new company, Franchise Realty Corporation. Its job wasn't to sell food. Its job was to buy land, busy street corners and high-traffic intersections, then lease that land back to McDonald's franchisees, often at a markup of up to 40% over what the company itself paid. Suddenly, McDonald's wasn't just collecting a small royalty on burgers sold. It was collecting rent every single month, whether the burgers sold well that week or not. And rent came with something a royalty never could: leverage. Here's the part most people miss. Because McDonald's now owned the land, breaking the company's rules wasn't just a franchise violation. It was breaking a lease. And breaking a lease meant something franchisees could not ignore: eviction. Overnight, Kroc had more control over how every restaurant looked, operated, and served food than almost any franchisor in America. Not because he demanded it, but because he owned the ground underneath the demand. Think about what that actually meant in practice. A franchisee who cut corners on cleanliness, ignored the approved menu, or ran the restaurant their own way wasn't just risking a stern phone call from corporate. They were risking the one thing that kept their entire livelihood standing: the lease on the land under their own restaurant. That single structural detail is why McDonald's restaurants look remarkably consistent worldwide, decade after decade. Not because every franchisee happened to share the same standards, but because the alternative to following them was losing the building itself. But the real genius of this model wasn't control. It was what it did inside a bank's office. Restaurants are risky businesses. Ingredients spoil, trends shift, staff turns over constantly. Banks know this, and they price loans accordingly: high interest and cautious terms. Real estate is a different story entirely. Land holds value. Buildings can be repossessed and resold. To a bank, real estate looks safe. So when McDonald's showed up as a real estate company with a restaurant chain attached, instead of a restaurant chain hoping for a loan, banks treated it completely differently. Lower interest rates, larger loans, faster expansion. The burgers were never the product banks were financing. The land was. Fast forward to today, and the numbers are almost impossible to ignore. McDonald's real estate holdings account for roughly 99% of the company's total assets on its balance sheet. Rent alone makes up around a third of the company's entire global revenue. And when you compare how McDonald's actually makes its money, the difference is staggering. Restaurants the company runs itself operate at around an 18% profit margin. Restaurants funded through the franchise and rent model, the company doesn't even operate them, generate margins around 82%. Read that again. The stores McDonald's doesn't even run are more than 4 times more profitable than the ones it does. That's not a fast food margin. That's a real estate margin. And it shows up in ownership too. Globally, McDonald's owns roughly 45% of the land its restaurants sit on and around 70% of the buildings themselves. Not the franchisee. Not a random landlord. McDonald's. Every one of those buildings pays rent to the same company, every single month, regardless of how many burgers cross the counter that day. Break down a single recent year and the pattern gets even clearer. In 2021, McDonald's pulled in about $13.1 billion in revenue directly from its franchisees. Of that number, 64% was rent. Only 36% was royalties on sales. At the level of a single restaurant, franchisees typically hand over somewhere between 8% and 15% of their sales just in rent before they've paid staff, ingredients, or anything else. The burger is still the product on the menu. The rent is the product on the balance sheet. Here's the part that makes this model almost bulletproof. If McDonald's only made money from burgers sold, a recession would hit it exactly like it hits every other restaurant chain. Fewer customers, thinner margins, real pain. But rent doesn't work like restaurant sales. A lease is a fixed, contractual payment. Whether a franchisee sells a record month of Big Macs or barely limps through a slow quarter, the rent check to McDonald's corporate is still due. That's the quiet advantage hiding underneath the golden arches. While franchisees absorb the ups and downs of the actual restaurant business, McDonald's corporate collects something closer to guaranteed income, month after month, recession or not. It's why a company most people think of as a fast food chain has, for decades, behaved financially more like a real estate investment trust than a restaurant. Here's where the story gets human. By 1967, Sonneborn, the architect of this entire system, believed a recession was coming and wanted McDonald's to slow down, stop building, and protect what they had. Kroc disagreed. He wanted to keep expanding aggressively, no matter what the numbers said about caution. The two men who built an empire together couldn't agree on what to do with it. Sonneborn resigned that same year. The man who realized McDonald's was really a real estate company walked away right as that idea was about to make the company one of the most valuable brands in the world. He spent his remaining years largely out of the spotlight, while the structure he built kept running exactly as designed, long after he left the building. Kroc, meanwhile, kept expanding. And the real estate engine Sonneborn left behind is precisely what made that aggressive growth survivable. Every new location wasn't just a bet on burgers selling well. It was a new piece of property added to a portfolio that would keep generating rent regardless of how any single restaurant performed. So the next time you drive past a McDonald's, here's what's actually happening inside that building. Someone is frying burgers. Yes. But the company that put the golden arches on that corner isn't primarily earning money from what's happening at the register. It's earning money because it owns the corner. The burgers were never really the business. They were the reason a landlord could put a restaurant sign on the building instead of a for rent sign and get millions of customers to walk in and pay rent without ever knowing that's what they were doing. Harry Sonneborn wasn't being clever when he said McDonald's wasn't in the food business. He was describing, in one sentence, one of the most profitable disguises in modern business history. Sell something people already want every day and quietly build the real fortune underneath it where nobody thinks to look. McDonald's didn't invent this idea. It just proved, at global scale, how well it works. Subway built its franchise system on a similar principle. Low margins on sandwiches, steady leverage from long-term leases and territory control. Starbucks, for years, treated prime corner real estate as strategically important as the coffee itself, famously chasing high-visibility locations even when a store nearby already existed. Chick-fil-A takes it further still. The company typically owns the land and building outright for many of its locations, then selects operators to run the day-to-day restaurant, collecting a share of sales as something closer to a landlord than a traditional franchisor. The pattern repeats because it works. Sell something people buy out of habit: food, coffee, convenience, and let that habit fund a much quieter, much larger asset underneath it. The genius was never the burger, the sandwich, or the coffee cup. It was realizing, decades before most competitors caught on, that the daily habit was just the mechanism, and the real business was what that habit was quietly built on top of. And once you know to look for it, you start noticing it everywhere, in businesses that look nothing like fast food, selling nothing like burgers, running the exact same play. That's exactly where we're going next.